somebody asked me to use my best investigative skills to come up with what is on Serban's Mixbus. Now, I can't just pull this stuff out of thin air, and there's a lot of information out there from Serban's right-hand man, John Haynes. And I'm basically going to use what he has said and what I think is most likely going on to give you my best interpretation of what it is. Now, I could be wrong, so I'm going to leave the door open for that. When you look up John Haynes's amazing forum discussion on Gearspace, you're going to see a ton of stuff. This is the idea, and he won't disclose exactly what Serban's Mixbus is because it's proprietary. He would get in big trouble for doing that. But he discloses the order and what the plugins do, how many there are, especially the order being the most important, I think, for you guys to try on your mixes immediately. Because a lot of people, especially people who are a little bit newer, they get very sort of overwhelmed with all the choices you could possibly have for as soon as you start adding things on the mix bus, what should you add and in what order changes the sound of your mix so much. Now, let's break it down. Number one, the first thing he uses, saturation, tape, some sort of diode, triode, pentode, tube, the flavor there. Most likely he does it in one plugin because they talk about how, this is what John Haynes has mentioned in that long forum, 4 to 5 plugins max on his mix bus. So in order to get done what I'm about to describe in 4 to 5 plugins, you can't be stacking saturators. It just wouldn't work. It might work in 1 or 2 cases that I'm going to describe as possibilities, right? But let's look at it this way. There's probably one thing there doing some flavor, color, additive saturation, similar to how it would be if you were mixing through a console of some kind. It's like you're getting all this flavor that combines in your mix bus, but before it hits mix bus compression, it's already been hit with transformers. It's been hit with, whatever the analog circuitry is going to add to it, all the electronics and the whole strip before it gets there. So I think he's thinking about it along that line. And when I've done this in my own test to see if this works, absolutely is my favorite way to work now is saturation first. Tape, tube, pick something, anything. I like the Ampex ATR 102 as the first thing. Sometimes the Studer A800 because they sound very different. And I know the A800 wasn't a print deck, but that doesn't matter. Chad Blake uses it on his mix bus. And if you try it, you'll realize the low end, super tight. It's super tight and aggressive. You get way more low end by adding a Studer A800 to your mix bus than you do by doing almost anything else. So when we figure this out, first thing is additive effects like saturation. Second thing, compression. The reason being to smooth and glue things together. It doesn't matter exactly what you use here unless it's this one particular plugin that does a lot. I'm going to tell you what that is because I use it. Chad Blake uses it everywhere, and I'm pretty sure, not 100% positive, I'm pretty sure they're using it too, Serban and John Haynes. And the reason I say that is because John Haynes mentions to fill the holes. Now, let me explain 2 possibilities of where this could be. It could be at the last possible slot on their mix bus, so the very last thing that they print their mix after, right? So out of 5 slots, number 5, or it could be number 2. Now, the reason I say that is because the Mic DSP ML4000 is both a multiband compressor and a multiband expander that does upward expansion. So as a result, it fills holes. And that's what they talk about. They use this to fill the holes. Now, when you think of a Serban mix, what I think of, and I've said it before, is like airy. You think of like floating on air. That happens because of the nature of the characteristics of an upward expander. Essentially, it pulls up levels that are too low. So if you have something like vocal tails of reverbs and things up in the top end and you want that to shine and be a part of your mix, you could use that to pull those up. So every time the level gets below the threshold, it pulls it up. Just the opposite of a compressor. Every time the compressor gets above the threshold, it keeps it down. So this kind of a tool used on the mix bus is going to do a lot. And the particular thing about the ML4000 is it has a limiter built in. So the reason that plugin is very interesting, and I'm not pushing, try it if you want, don't do whatever you want. But the point is I use it on a lot of things. I use it outside of the Mixbus also, because even when I haven't used it on the Mixbus, it finds a place on the drum bus, because Chad Blake's drums have it all over the place, and his drums have a particular sound. And I love the way Chad Blake's mixes sound. I love the way his drums sound. So using this there helps a lot with that, because the expander brings things up that are kind of too quiet. So it creates a uniqueness there. It holds them down because you can simultaneously use the multiband compressor to keep things held into place so nothing gets too crazy when the upward expander brings it up. And it has a limiter on it. So it's also like giving you a thicker, kind of more dense sound right out the gate. So that's why it's no secret. You got Chad Blake sending all his drums there. Like, no matter what bus he's creating for drums, he could have 3 or 4 of them in a lot of cases. They all have an ML4000 on them. So when we look at what's going on the Serban's Mixbus again, when we snip back to there, so if you look at the possibilities for the second slot, let's assume it's not the Mic DSP ML4000. Then any compressor there might be the answer. Could be a G-Bus style SSL kind of bus comp, because, when he was working with Teddy Riley, I'm fairly sure they were working on an SSL. As a result, he may be very comfortable with an SSL style bus compressor. So that could be in the second slot. Now, moving on from there, the third thing he does, if necessary, is 3D imaging. Now, something you should know about Serban is he has said before, wider's not always better. Sometimes you need to keep the emotion in the song and the punch in the center, keep all the stuff like really hitting you in the center, and as soon as you spread out wide, you lose the middle. Creates a little bit of a hole, and it makes it sound not so good. So if he is using 3D imaging, it might just be for things like choruses, automating it on in the choruses, a little bit of a 3D widening there and maybe nowhere else, or he's using it extremely sparingly, just a little bit. All right. Now, what a lot of other guys do outside of what Serban's doing is mono making the center, like the mono maker on like the Brainworks V3 kind of thing, where you take, some frequency that you pick and center that in the mono of the mix. So like you could have 90 hertz on down, or I don't know, pick a number, any number, 120, and that would be mono. Everything in that zone and down, mono. That's like a cone kind of thing, where it's super center and then it gets wider on the upper frequencies. So there's no right or wrong way. That's just something you may want to do if you're also widening. Now, after the widener, he's got an EQ. The EQ, who knows what it is, but let's go to the last slot, and then we'll go back to that. So the last slot is a limiter. So I'll just run it down again. You got some sort of additive effects for the flavor of the tube tape, whatever. The second thing is compressor to smooth everything out. Third thing is a stereo imaging plugin of some kind. Fourth thing is an EQ. Fifth thing is a limiter. Now, if you know anything, pretty much, if you've ever heard anybody talk about Serban, you've heard them probably say metric halo channel strip. If you've used that plugin, there's a limiter on that plugin. Now, I'm not saying that he's using that as both his EQ and his last plugin, but that would be the only way you could get done in 4 plugins if you were using, everything I just said, some sort of tape kind of thing, and also a compressor, like maybe the Mic DSP, and also an imager. And then how do you get EQ done and limiting in 4? That's a tough one. So you must have to maybe combine the two in some way. And there is a limiter on there. I'm not sure if that's what he's using, but I'm just saying it's there. So let's acknowledge that that's a possibility. If he doesn't use that, maybe he uses some other EQ of some kind that was extremely popular, back in the day, like a Pultec style EQ or something. It's possible, but it would strike me that he would want something to be more transparent than that in a way, potentially. So that's where I get, like, could be the metric halo. It's possible. I don't hear anybody mentioning that stuff, but it could be. The plugin that's last, if it was the Mic DSP limiter, right, which is also very possible that would be the limiter, because that has a look-ahead mode. It also has a brick wall limiter built in, so that might be the last plugin. Very well could be. And, maybe when he says 4 or 5 plugins, that could be because sometimes they don't use the imager. That's the other thing that my brain's telling me is very possible to happen. And in that case, if they didn't use one of these things, like an imager, for example, then it's very possible they could maybe be using 2 saturators, one after another, in sort of in series to give something a little more love or a little boost in different places that didn't exist or something. So when I think about what imager he could be using, if I wanted to speculate that on the 3D imaging part of this, I would say it's possible he's using a Waves S1. And the reason is he's been doing this a really long time. And yes, a lot of us love to buy new plugins. I'm sure everyone's always trying things. Since he hears a sound in his head he's always trying to achieve, he could probably do it with any plugins, right? But that's been around so long, I could see him picking something that was like, that's so sort of under the radar that a lot of people have because it's not a very expensive plugin, and I bet you he's using something like that to create world-class amazing mixes as opposed to paying monthly for, like, Ozone. I just have a feeling he's not doing that. Also, if he was doing that, that would certainly be a way to use, like, one plugin to get a ton of things done, but I don't know. When I read the way that the John Haynes kind of forum went, I just don't know if I see them using that. I almost see that as a bit of a decoy to think that he's using that. I don't know. That's what my reconnaissance skills tell me is just like it's most likely just one plugin doing imaging, most likely. Now, when I think about what what saturators could he be using, that is where who knows is the answer to that. There's so many different saturators out there that nobody really knows what that would be. And anybody who claims they have a leaked session here and there, I severely doubt it because anybody who has the luxury and pays to work with Serban, don't think that that comes with the proprietary information of what's on his Mixbus. I really doubt that it does, because if it did, everyone would know it. Anyone who paid the money to get a mix done from Serban would know it. I know that Serban does do like FaceTimes, like Zoom type, I'm sure he uses audio movers and kind of has his clients kind of sit in on the mix because, it's a hefty price tag to do those mixes, but I don't believe he's sharing his screen because I do believe he looks at his mixes as proprietary. So, he may be kind of playing the mix through in different sections and talking about whatever, but I would bet he's not showing his entire mix. I don't know for a certainty whether he is or not, but that would be the only way anyone would really be able to know. If somebody claims to have a leak session or this and that, don't be surprised if it is a session from before he got it, which is much, much more likely because he strikes me as someone who's really intelligent. He's going to do everything he can to not let his secrets get out there. Now, all that said, knowing all this stuff doesn't change the fact that having the skills and to know what he wants is really the answer for why he gets his mixes to sound the way he wants. But using plugins like I just described, that order of plugins, if you change the order at all, it creates a very different result. If you put saturation last, it sounds very different than if you put it first. If you use this kind of upward expander kind of thing, first in your chain, it's going to sound very different than if you put it last. So, that you've heard people say over the top processing. That's what the MIC DSP ML4000 does when you use it in this kind of, when you use the expander function in it to do the upward expansion. It does that. There's other plugins out there like OTT that do it and stuff like that too, but they don't do it like that. They don't do it because that does more than just pull things up. It pulls them up, keeps them in control, and adds the limiter thing, which adds a flavor. The limiter change on your Mixbus, just changing the limiter will sound completely different. But what Serban has said before is it doesn't matter if he changed his limiter because the end result is going to be the same because he knows what he's shooting for, which is a huge leg up you have when you can hear what you want in your head. Doesn't matter what it gives you, you'll tweak things to get it to where you hear it in your head. You're not just at the mercy of any limiter, which is the biggest problem when people are new starting out. Like, I have to also preface this whole thing before I get out of here with the really big caveat. If you're relatively new at mixing, you're probably going to do way more harm than good by putting a lot of stuff on your mix, because if you don't hear what it's doing, you're way more likely to do more with it that will wind up hurting things, making them not sound as good. So it's better to do that in stages. Add one thing at a time so you really understand what it's doing before you go in and add these 5 type of plugins, try 100 different ones, set them all the wrong way. I'm all for experimenting, trying, and like there is no right answer when it comes to art. There's no wrong way to use anything, but you're way more likely to create a problem for yourself that you will have a hard time fixing the more stuff you add. So, just as a caveat, there's plenty of guys out there who do mixes who, especially the ones that get like sounds that are generated from sample pads and things like that, like a lot of guys in hip hop that use one plugin on their mix bus. There's plenty of people that use that IK multimedia T-Rax the one. You know, I think David Guetta used it on something once, and then everybody started just use that. I think Max Martin may have used it once. Somebody used it once at some point, and then everybody after that, that's what they use on their mix bus. So, you know, all I could say is try different things, but you use like one or two of them before you use all five. Or if you want to go the route of all five, just kind of hear what they're doing and do it sparingly. Just use less than you think, and you'll probably be able to dial it in once you start hearing what everything's doing. But mess with this order, all right? The order thing is critical. And also, if you didn't catch the video yesterday, there's a link at the end of this one to that, because that will tell you basically how hard you should be going into your mix bus. Because if you go in there too hard, you're hitting everything too hard from jump, you got no room, everything's going to sound way worse than if you pull the mix down prior to getting into your mix bus to a level that's reasonable. You have to have all the transients before you get in your mix bus. So if you're slamming into the mix bus, you're already messed up. So there's ways to kind of achieve that where you can get a visual sense always of what that's going to be and kind of fail safe yourself from messing up the levels getting into the mix bus, and audition different levels very easily. So check that out if you haven't seen it. Questions, comments, answers, throw it in there. I really do want to hear, you know, other things you guys use, because I always get ideas, and sometimes if I see the same plugin kind of thing enough, I want to try it because I don't have every plugin. Evan Jaffe, Custom Cut Studios. I look forward to hearing what you guys use on your mix bus. You guys got this. Take it easy.